Hi guys, it's me again, Kamil Rückert from the Psychosomatic Student Group Riga, and today's topic will be emotions, which makes me quite happy because today I tried to record this lecture 3 times and each time my keynote failed, so I was dealing with a lot of anger and a lot of disappointment, but finally, hopefully, we're here today and this try will work. Why are emotions so important? Why are we talking about them? Well, it's mainly because most psychosomatic illnesses could also be described as emotional illnesses. So today's artwork will be by Roy Lichtenstein, 1965, Crying Woman. And before we start, keep in mind this is a student lecture. Not only psychoanalysts or psychotherapists were interested in emotions, but long ago or long before the development of psychoanalysis, emotions have been the main interest or one of the interests of a lot of philosophers. It started with Aristotle, who really divided between two emotions, ponos versus hedone, lust or unpleasure, and the Epicureans thought that there was just lust or joy as the main characteristic of all emotions, while the Stoics, for example, disagreed with that. Descartes later thought of 6 different emotions: love, hate, longing or seeking, depending on the translation, joy, sadness, and admiration were those emotions. Spinoza disagreed. He just believed that there are 3 emotions: joy, sadness, and again seeking or longing. Kant followed more the Aristotle idea of joy versus unpleasure, and then Nietzsche really broke with most of that because he thought, well, you cannot separate emotions from the cognition. He believed that every emotion, behind every emotion, there was a judgment or an appreciation which were inherited to us by emotions. So it is impossible for us to judge or to appreciate without emotions because we precisely got those abilities by emotions and feelings. And then, last but not least, we had Freud, who's now probably the most known, for some a philosopher, for some a doctor, for some a novelist, who wrote about emotions. And for him, he really just followed Aristotle's idea, and he said, well, there's just joy and unpleasure, and really, or lust and unpleasure. And this is from his famous The Lust Principle, or Principle of Joy. I unfortunately don't have the English translation in my head. But what Freud did, he added to all the emotion something like a childhood sexuality. Nowadays, when we talk about emotion, we talk mainly about neuroscience, about cognitive sciences, and we have people like Ekman, Panksepp, or Damasio who really approach this idea of emotions from a neuroscientific point of view. And for Damasio, emotions are a complex automatic program of evolution which is a part of our cognition to make decisions or to help us make decisions. But it's already quite interesting because most philosophers started to use the word affects rather than emotions or feelings. And this discussion has been going on ever since, and it's a really large discussion in the scholarly world between those 3 terms. And I won't go into depths about this, so maybe just take a keynote that affects are a bodily reaction without a conscious experience. And here already a lot of scholars would disagree, but this is again what the majority would say. Emotions then are a conscious experience, automatic processes which just show up, and then we have feelings. And feelings are basically emotions connected to our history or to our experience of the world. But feelings are just our conscious history and our conscious experiences. So let's take a look at the brain structures to understand how emotions are formed, but mainly how they're influenced as well by our structures. And here I concentrated on Otto Kernberg's literature review from 2006, Psychoanalytic Affect Theory in the Light of Contemporary Neurobiological Findings, which is a quite impressive title, I would say, but it's a really good study to read up on if you're interested in the interaction between those, and especially in terms of psychoanalytic object relations. So here you can see our logo of the psychosomatic student group Riga. In yellow or ochre you can see the prefrontal cortex. In purple you can see the hypothalamus. In red you can see the amygdala. And in green you can see the hippocampus. And these four entities are really important for the formation of emotions, and they're also intertwined. Nowadays, we know that the hippocampus stores our affective memory, which means that as we go through life, our memories about maybe a good, nice walk outside with your parents or the experiences with a loved one are saved, but not only as a cognitive picture, but also as the affective memory towards it. And this affective memory then influences our prefrontal cortex, the brain structure which is involved in the planning and working memory of integration and perception of emotions. So meaning, as we go through life, we make experiences. These experiences influence our perception and integration of emotions. And these prefrontal, or this prefrontal cortex then has a connection with the amygdala, which is responsible for the activation of negative effects such as fear or rage. So when we perceive something that is dangerous, that is fearful, the amygdala is activated, and this is stored as in the hippocampus. The amygdala itself then activates the hypothalamus, and this leads to sweaty hands. You feel your palpitation of the heart. So everything really that the sympathicus is responsible of. So you might already see a little problem here that we will, or that I'm going to ask you about later. But in general, let's say that Otto Kernberg's hypothesis is that early object relations, so the early relationships with our caregivers, are stored as the affective memory within the hippocampus. Our affective memory then plays a key role in our integration and perception of emotions in the prefrontal cortex. And our prefrontal cortex then influences the activation of negative effects. And what that means for him is really that the earliest object relations with your mom, with your father, or with your caregivers, may it be someone else or maybe your grandparents, form our perception of emotions in life. But I guess then the question is, what is the function of emotions? Why do we need them, and what are they good for? Well, the function of emotions is quite simple in many ways. Emotions are indicators which give a meaning to a perceived condition, or rather which evaluate changes of external conditions intrapsychologically to think of an action. And this definition was taken from Gerd Rudolph's book Psychotherapeutische Medizin und Psychotherapie, and I can only recommend it to every German speaker who is interested in this subject. So in short, what he says is, every time something changes in your surrounding or in your world, you need to make a decision, and emotions help you with that. Emotions force you or help you to ask the question, how should I act, and what does this mean to me? Think of you being in a room with many neutral faces, or maybe an open place with a lot of faces, and suddenly you see an angry face. This is a change in the external condition in the world. Suddenly you need to make up your mind. How should I act? If you see an angry face, maybe you get anxious, or maybe you get angry yourself, or maybe you even have a certain seeking feeling that you want to go towards and explore this. At the same time, if you see a smiley face, someone with a huge smile, you see all the teeth, you might have the emotion of joy, and you want to know, should I also go towards that person? Maybe you're happy too, and. So let's bring both of this together and see what we have learned so far. So far we have learned that emotions are influenced by our early object relations, and emotions are subjective indicators for a changing environment to mediate proper behavior. So what's the problem that could arise from this? Maybe you have already guessed it, maybe you need a time. Pause this video if you need, and come back here in a second. Maybe you've guessed already right that if we have a really bad relationship with our earliest caregivers, or if we made bad experiences, this leads to our subjective indicators being changed, and our environment is perceived in a different way. But this is not the only function of an emotion. We do not only experience emotions, but we also express them. And the expression of an emotion can be seen as an instruction for another person, or an object as we call it. It gives a certain plan of action, and this plan of action can be nonverbal, with a gesture. You might put your arms on your waist, you might stand up tall, your mimic might change, you might make a frown, your forehead might wrinkle up, your eyes become bigger, but also your voice changes. It can be lovely, it can be really joyful, but it can also be very aggressive. And at the same time, we have the verbal expression by the cognitive verbal interaction, meaning the words we say. We can say angry things, or we can say lovable things. We can say very joyful things, and so on. But here a problem is already that we can say very angry things in a very nice way, and vice versa. So emotions are really in the intersubjective sense, a wish for change. And I took the following graph here from Gerd Rudolph's book again to show you what that means. You might have the emotion of seeking, which means that you're interested in a situation, you seek for something or someone. But the advice for change for the objects or for the other person is, come closer to me, let me explore you, let me research you. Anxiety means that you're afraid of something or someone. And this means, as a message, you should not harm me, go away. Rage, on the other hand, means that you're angry at something or someone again. And the advice for change to the object is, you should go away or I will hurt you. Sadness means to the object that he or she should come back and be present for you, or maybe take care for you. And disgust, you all know that if you see some vomit maybe, or you smell some unpleasant smell, you want it to go away as far as possible. So emotions are not only indicators for change, but they are also changers. So you perceive things, but you also give a message to the outside world. So the problem here is already that you need to be able to express emotions, and at the same time you need to be able to investigate them. Not only the subject needs to be able to decode their own feelings, but it also needs to be able to understand the feelings of others. And before we talk about the idea of, or the inability to access emotions, Let us quickly think about the basic emotions or the emotions we know. This illustration was taken from the Discovery magazine about Jack Pansap's findings. And what he says is basically that not only humans experience emotions, but all mammals. And in the brain structures that we learned in the beginning, the primal emotions are formed and then connected to our thinking and planning in the prefrontal cortex. So our decision making, as well as the decision making of mammals, is influenced by it. And those basic emotions or primal emotions are quite, or again, there's a vivid discussion about them. And in 1990, Ortony and Turner tried to summarize the different views. And you can already see that on the right spectrum, Maurer and Weiner and Graham tried to follow more the Freudian or the Aristotle idea of pain, pleasure, happiness, sadness, while others tried to look for a broader definition of this. Pansap had four emotions in the beginning. I think he later added three more. And if you're interested in him, you can really YouTube him. There's a nice TED Talk before his death where he talks about what primary emotions are and what the implications for emotional research are for us as humans. But we shouldn't get lost in this vivid discussion. Rather, we should look at the emotions that are constantly brought up in the discussion and that repeatedly has shown to be at the core. And these emotions that you can see here were really were often mentioned because on different facial expressions you can see different emotions. Joy and seeking have different facial expressions, while fear and anger have them too. So we have 8 basic emotions in this lecture. You might disagree. Maybe you like to follow Plutchik's Wheel of Emotions, where he only mentions or where he mentions different emotions as core emotions. But the idea is that those are the basic emotions and they can later form to different ones. Boredom, helplessness, but also serenity, acceptance are emotions that build up on these basic emotions. But this is maybe something for you to research on if you're interested in. For now, let's continue to the inability to access emotions. And let's give a little overview once again. So emotions help us to interpret a situation, make a decision, and send a message to the object. At the same time, the ability to access them is strongly influenced by early caregivers. And I wrote down 6 points to summarize emotions and at the same time already give an outlook on the inability to access them before I come to my last slide. So, the presence of emotions is normal. We all have emotions and we all need to be able to bear them. Emotions also shape our experience because they give us meaning and at the same time they help us to make a decision. They give us thereby the sense of being alive. In the absence, which is a normal, they lead to a feeling of or a decrease of liveliness or vitality. Usually, the absence or the inability to access them is due to trauma or microtraumas in childhood. Traumas are the ones we know. They're abuse, whether it's physical, whether it's sexual, or whether it's psychological. And microtraumas are a bit different, and you might have this one really annoying friend who tells you, oh, don't worry, this is not so bad. Like a lot of people experience that. Why do people even get so emotional about this? But microtraumas are these small things that kind of keep repeating kept repeating in your childhood. You might have neglect in the more extreme sense of the spectrum of one parent who's gone either by death or by choice, which is really a trauma. But then you have micro traumas, which are in this sense small actions of neglect that over time really form to become a bigger trauma, and that are at the same time also memorized in your hippocampus. Another idea is that the earlier the trauma, the more structurally damaged the subject. And if you have seen our lecture on the personality organization, let me just remind you that basically the structure of the individual correlates in many ways with the idea of personality. A personality is made up by many things. It's the defense mechanisms we use, it's our sense of identity, it's the integration of the I, the ego, and our self-reflexive abilities and our sense of reality, or being in touch with reality. The earlier the trauma, the more those entities are damaged, and the more our structure is damaged. So neurotics who experience trauma much later in their life might have a repression of emotions, while borderlines have many different problems with emotions that I will talk about in my next slide. And psychotics will always deal with this existential terror all their life. And at the same time, the experience and the expression of an emotion leads to a relief, which is kind of at the core of psychosomatic theory, that once you see the conflict, the emotional conflict, or once you work through that trauma or micro-trauma, the emotions are relieved. And though you will still experience them, they don't cause so much disturbance. But let's take again a look at a slide from Gerd Rudolph that I modified a bit. And it goes through the developmental stages. As children, we always have basic needs. These needs are relationship longings. We all, as little children, depend on our mother, on the comfort she gives us, or on a motherly figure. At the same time, we also want our drives to be able to be expressed and to be fulfilled. If these problems or if these needs are not met, and this is usually due to trauma or repetitive micro-trauma, it leads to the development of dysfunctional emotional systems. And here, depending on the age, we have the structural damages. A neurotic conflict might lead to the lack of a basic emotion due to defense mechanisms, whether it's intellectualization, rationalization, humor, repression. And for a more structurally damaged person, like a borderliner, the emotional problems are not the lack of one emotion, but rather the complex inability to access them. Borderliners might have problems with the affect generation, even forming an emotion. They also have problems with affect differentiation. What kind of emotion am I feeling right now? Is it anger? Is it disappointment? Is it joy? And what kind of things are here? So this is a question that is really hard to define in therapy for those patients. Affect control means staying with an emotion, or the interpersonal ability to have the appropriate affect in an appropriate situation. And affect tolerance is the ability to tolerate it. Most people, when they feel angry, they will realize that they feel angry, but they won't have any impulse to act it out. And they have the affect verbalization. Most of the listeners will be able to talk about their emotions in a very distinct way, talk about the reasons that led to the development and so on. Structurally damaged people won't have that. And the affect reflection leads to the self-reflexive, or is in connection to the self-reflexive function. Can I think about the effect? Why is that effect brought up? And all these 6 entities or inabilities to access them lead to the maladaptive lead to maladaptive emotions such as despair, disappointment, helplessness, outrage, emptiness, or void. And they become a mood in some way that form an underlying emotional quality for those people. So I hope you enjoyed our lecture. I hope you learned something. And if you're interested, visit our site www.psgriga.org and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And thanks a lot for watching.